I'm going to run through the different neighborhoods of Copenhagen and identify which is the oldest building in that particular neighborhood. But first, we have to define what a neighborhood is. And, well, it depends on the source. The oldest and most consistent way of divvying up Copenhagen in different neighborhoods is the land registry. If you either own or rent property in Copenhagen, you would know exactly where you fit into the land registry. This works very well in the outer suburbs, but closer to city center, it breaks down. For instance, the medieval town center is divided into 9 wards, whereas the 3 extensions from the 17th century, combining about the same size as the medieval town, is only 3 wards. And the bridge quarters, which is actually 4 different neighborhoods, is only in 3 wards. Another way of looking at it is the postal districts. This is something that people not living in the town would be more familiar with, but they tend to be a bit bigger than actual neighborhoods. Note also that this map includes Frederiksberg, which is actually not part of Copenhagen. And finally, the municipality have defined a number of neighborhoods. However, they do not always correlate with the observations that people actually living there have. With that in mind, even though the finer details of the delimitation of the individual neighborhood may vary, there's actually not much fight about which is the oldest building in each neighborhood. When in 1901 the parish of Brønshøj with its constituent villages of Emdrup, Utterslev, Brønshøj, Husum and Vanløse, together with the district of Valby and Vigerslev from Hvidovre parish was incorporated in Copenhagen, Brønshøj Church instantly became the oldest building in the whole municipality. The nave and the choir are supposed to have been built by the same man who built the first castle in Copenhagen, whereas the tower and the wings are later additions. Due to conflagrations and warfare, there's actually no medieval buildings in the medieval inner city. There are some ruins and some cellars, but the oldest building actually standing is the university prison hidden behind this gate. Why is there a university prison, you might ask? Well, that's because the University of Old was its own jurisdiction. So they had this building that is today used by the advisory council to the dean, where in the basement you would have the prison, and on the top floor you would have the home and offices of the dean himself. When in the late 17th century the medieval town wall was replaced by more modern defences, the new western and northern ramparts followed the line of the town wall, whereas the eastern did not. Instead, it ran perpendicular, thus encompassing an area later known as the Frederikshavn. However, there was already some buildings within this area, oldest of which was the gatehouse for Rosenborg Palace. The gatehouse was built to function as offices for the building process while they built the palace. Don't let yourself be fooled by the year and monogram on the gate beside it, because that actual gate is much younger. Another extension made in the 17th century was the completely new town of Christianshavn on the other side of the harbor, and this position protected it against the big catastrophes that hit the old town. As a result, you will find quite a few older buildings in this part of town. The town plan was designed to imitate Dutch cities in order to lure Dutch merchants and craftsmen to town, but very few actually came. One of the few was Kort Adler, who became an admiral. The first attempt to create a national educational system was the establishment of the so-called cavalry schools. They were so called because they were established in the cavalry districts. Although these do not spread all over the country, it was a sizable increase over what had earlier been a private-only educational system. Two of the cavalry schools still exist in the municipality. The other one is in Brøndshøj. In Valby, it is the oldest building and now part of the library. The town had 4 gates, named after the directions of the compass, and in front of each gate there was a bridge which led on to a radiating main thoroughfare, which was in turn named after the bridge. And around these streets a suburb grew up, and they were also named after the bridge, and that's why they're called the bridge quarters. These bridge quarters became the focus of the rapid expansion of the city during the early industrialization, and as a result, very few old buildings are still standing because of the associated building boom. The oldest building in Westbridge is therefore the former highway inn of the Black Horse. You would have to know what you're looking for to find the traces of the old village of Vanløse, because neither the street grid nor the street names would lead you here. There are few surviving buildings from the time when it was just an agricultural outpost, and the oldest is the Meadow Farm. In Northbridge, the oldest building was originally part of a bakery, but is better known for its use as a girls' school. Today, it's just an office building. The oldest building on Eastbridge can't actually be seen from the street. It's one of the backyards behind this building, but since it's a private yard, there's no trespassing, so I can't get a picture of it. Vigerslev is a very old village, and in between the much younger development, you can still find some old buildings stemming back from the time that this was an agricultural hub. By its very name, Utterslev reveals it's a very old settlement, and it has retained its forte up to the present day, with a few of the village buildings around it, the oldest of which is Stormly, which actually means shelter from the storm. The old village of Sundby, named after its proximity to Øresund, was a string of houses and farms along a road that was cut almost in the middle by the Amager Bridge Street. Only few of these buildings still exist along the old village high street, whose name can be construed as the Meadowsland Road. When the king decided to sell his meadows in the 18th century, it was divided into a number of country houses, two of which still exist, although the buildings are not as old. The name of the oldest is also a bit confusing because it happens to be the same as a locality near town that was part of the fortifications. But the really confusing part is that the municipality insists on calling the area for King's Meadows, whereas everybody living there call it Southport. The village itself has been obliterated, but some of the outlying farms are still around. The Good Hope is right next to the cemetery, which you might deduct from the front yard decorations. When they constructed the eastern rampart, they were already building in a new neighborhood that was thus created. And the same thing happened when they demolished it, because the observatory had been built on the backside of the ramparts, and it was left standing afterwards. The last of the bridges, originally South Bridge, had competing names, and eventually Amagerbro won out. Amager is the name of the island that it's on. A lot of the streets in this area are named after European localities, primarily countries, and this one is named after Sweden. When the ramparts were eventually abandoned in the 1870s, there was just such a pent-up need for new construction that the area became focus of a building boom. As such, it's actually pretty difficult to pinpoint exactly which building is the oldest, since there is only a few months between the oldest buildings. Although Tivoli Gardens predates the demolishing of the western ramparts, no buildings are left from that time, and the oldest therefore is the Pantomime Theatre. When the railway was built in 1863, there was a need for a junction here, but since there was no settlement, they named it after a nearby farm, which is actually in the neighboring municipality. This has led to the oddity that the neighborhood is actually split between two communities, and the building in the background is the former postal office, happens to be the northernmost building in Copenhagen municipality at all. Until the 1890s, with the foundation of the Freeport, the area now occupied by Northport was open water. The Freeport still exists, but it has moved a bit, and its former location has been taken over by a mix of office and residential buildings, including some of the former port facilities. Surviving structures from the founding of the Freeport is the Duty Clearinghouse and one of the warehouses on the other side of the street. The most controversial of the neighborhoods is Bispebjerg. The actual location, which means Bishop's Mountain, although it is a corruption of a name that means Stampede Mountain, is located north of the village of Utterslev. However, the municipality have defined the neighborhood of not only including all of Utterslev but also all of Emdrup, and this leads to people living in the southern part especially to not really identify themselves with such a name. Instead, they tend to identify instead with the postal code and call their neighborhood for Northwest, and this makes the Capernaum Church the oldest building in the neighborhood. When the area was incorporated, the village of Emdrup consisted of 4 farms, of which only one survives, although its building has been replaced. Instead, the oldest surviving building is this house. Back in the days, it was quite common for the owner or manager of a corporation to have his residence right next to the factory. In this case, it was a washing and dyeing company, which has long time gone, but the manager's building is still standing. The old village of Husum has been eradicated. You can still find it on the street grid, but there's nothing left from the village there. For the oldest building within its area, you instead have to go close to the border with Brønshøj to find some of the old villas. The newest neighborhood is Ørestad, that was created after the year 2000 with the building of a new metro line. Before that, it had been mostly wasteland because it was a dump site and a military shooting range. But there was one building that predates the founding of the actual neighborhood, and that was the Bella Center. The Bella Center is named after its former location at Bella Hills and moved here to become the largest conference center in the country.